What if the moment that shatters your world does not arrive with thunder or shouting, but with something as quiet as the sound of a hairdryer behind a closed door before sunrise? That question lingered in the air the morning Mark's life quietly began to change forever. It was 3:57 inches the morning in Arizona, one of those rare nights when rain drifted steadily across the desert sky, soft but heavy enough to make the world outside feel distant. The bedroom was dim, filled only with the faint red glow of the digital clock on the nightstand. Mark's eyes opened instinctively, not jolted awake, but pulled from sleep by a feeling he could not quite name. At first he did not understand why his heart beat a little faster, why his breathing felt shallow. Then he heard it. The soft continuous hum coming from behind the bathroom door. The hairdryer. At 4 in the morning. The sound did not belong to this hour. Not in their home. Not in their marriage. It was the first small ripple of something Mark could not yet see. He pushed himself up slightly, just enough to listen closer, to let his mind catch up to what his instincts were already whispering. The rain tapped against the window. The hairdryer hummed behind the door. Something was off. When the bathroom door finally opened, Amber stepped out into the dim room. Her hair was still damp at the ends, brushed out neatly, and there was a faint gloss on her lips. Not glamorous, not overly done, but prepared, in a way that made the early hour feel stranger, heavier. She moved with quiet purpose, slipping into her work boots in the dark as if trying not to wake him, not realizing he was already awake and watching. The sight of her made Mark straighten slightly, confusion pushing through the fog of sleep. She wasn't dressed for work. She wasn't dressed for sleep. She wasn't dressed for a rainy morning walk either, but she said nothing. Only tied her hair back and reached for her keys. Mark's voice came out low, rough from sleep. "You going in early?" She froze only for a breath, just long enough for him to notice, then answered with an overly calm tone that did not match the storm outside. "Just going for a walk. Meeting some coworkers before shift." "A walk," he repeated, letting the word settle between them like a stone dropped into water. At 4 in the morning. In the rain, she offered a faint smile, one that did not reach her eyes, and shrugged. "Fitness challenge. You know how they are at work." But Mark did not know. Not this version of her. He watched her slip out the door at 4:05, the house returning to stillness as the sound of rain grew louder. He sat there for a moment, trying to understand the feeling taking shape in his chest. It was not anger, not jealousy, just a quiet alarm, a whisper that something was not as it seemed. As the door clicked shut behind her, Mark felt the weight of a truth he could not yet name. His mind drifted back to the small changes he had ignored over the past few months, moments that had seemed harmless on their own. Girls' nights that stretched until 2 in the morning. Vague explanations about where she had been. The way she tilted her phone away when a notification popped up, the sudden shift from chatting freely to taking her phone everywhere, even to the laundry basket. These had been small warnings, subtle changes that contemporary relationship experts often refer to as emotional withdrawal. The early psychological drift that happens long before physical infidelity begins. Research shows that people who are hiding something often become vague in their explanations, avoid specifics, and deflect questions with practiced ease. As Mark sat in the dark bedroom, the memory of these little moments came back to him one by one, like puzzle pieces scattered across a table. He had not wanted to see the picture they were forming. Not until now. He wasn't a jealous man. He wasn't the type to overreact. If anything, Mark had always been steady, slow to suspect, slow to judge. They had been together since they were 17. He had trusted her for nearly 2 decades. But trust does not disappear in a dramatic burst. Sometimes it erodes quietly, grain by grain, until one small moment finally exposes the truth. And that morning, in the dim light, with the sound of rain pressing against the window and the absence of his wife lingering in the hallway, Mark felt the first real crack form inside him. He lay back down, staring at the empty space beside him, the sheets still cool where she had been. The hum of the bathroom had faded, but something else now filled his mind, something heavier, something he could not quiet. Questions he had never allowed himself to ask began whispering in the corners of his thoughts. Why was she really awake so early? Why get ready like that for a walk in the rain? Who exactly was she meeting at 4 in the morning? He did not have answers. Only a feeling. Only a whisper that this moment was not isolated, but the beginning of something larger. As the rain continued falling outside and the house settled back into silence, Mark understood one thing with painful clarity. Sometimes the beginning of the truth does not arrive loudly. It arrives softly, almost gently, like a whisper you try to ignore until you no longer can. What if the truth does not reveal itself through what you see, but through the small pieces that are missing, the moments that do not add up, the silence that speaks louder than any words someone refuses to say? That question slowly took shape in Mark's mind in the weeks after that strange early morning. At first, he tried to push it away, tried to stay grounded in routine, but the inconsistencies kept appearing, each one subtle but undeniable, like shadows slipping under a door. It began with the tattoo consultation. Amber had spoken casually about finally getting the tattoo they had once discussed, a feather with their children's names woven into the design. She left at 11:30 in the morning, said the appointment was at 1, and did not return until nearly 6 that evening. When she walked through the door, she looked tired in a strange way, not the tired of someone who had spent hours talking about sketches, but the tired of someone carrying a story they had not fully rehearsed. Mark asked simple questions, gentle questions, the kind a husband naturally asks. How did it go? Did you bring the sketches home? Amber hesitated only for a breath, then answered too quickly. She said the artist would email the designs. She said the ideas were not quite what she wanted. She said she forgot to bring anything home. And in that string of small excuses, something felt hollow. Not wrong, not incriminating, just hollow. Psychologists often describe this as narrative spacing, when someone involved in deception begins leaving vague, empty spaces in their stories to avoid getting caught in a detail they cannot defend. Mark did not know the term at the time, but he felt the emptiness. Then there was the Home Depot trip. It should have been simple. Amber claimed she went to look for lifting strap rings. She came home with a clean, empty shopping bag. When he glanced inside, it held nothing. Not a receipt, not a flyer, not a small impulse purchase like she normally made. She explained traffic, flashing lights, some vague mention of an accident on the freeway. Again, nothing specific, nothing concrete. These missing details, these loose threads, kept tugging at him. Each one was small enough to dismiss, yet heavy enough to stay. Weeks passed, and these patterns kept forming like faint footsteps leading somewhere he did not want to go. Her schedule no longer matched the places she claimed to be. The timestamps on her returns home made no sense compared to the errands she described. It was a series of mismatched puzzle pieces, edges that did not align. And still, Mark tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. He had built 19 years of marriage on trust. He did not want to tear it apart with suspicion. But the truth does not need permission to surface. It finds its own way. That was when Eric stepped into the picture. Eric, his longtime friend and a seasoned investigator, listened quietly over a couple of beers as Mark sorted through the strange changes and unanswered questions. When Mark finally paused, unsure of what to make of it all, Eric looked him straight in the eye and said something that reshaped everything. You're not looking for texts. You're looking for the absence of them. At first, the sentence seemed cryptic, but as Eric explained, it became frighteningly clear. People who hide things do not leave behind evidence that condemns them. They leave behind gaps, missing minutes, deleted threads, unaccounted hours. Investigators, Eric said, do not rely on what they can see. They rely on what should be there but isn't. Logs that show sudden drop-offs. Gaps in messages during times when behavior changes. Stories that have no supporting details. Silence where communication should exist. When you know what normal looks like, the absence of normal is the loudest alarm. Mark went home that night, feeling both heavier and sharper, like someone who finally recognizes the pattern in a storm cloud. He did not accuse Amber. He did not confront her with anger. Instead, he observed more carefully, with the quiet awareness Eric had taught him. That awareness led him to the moment he had been trying to avoid, the moment everything would finally crack open. It happened on an ordinary evening. Mark came home early, saw Amber on the couch scrolling through her phone, and felt the weight of the past weeks pressing down on him. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked, as calmly as a man could. "Let me see your phone." The room seemed to hold its breath. Amber froze, not dramatically, but long enough for him to notice the fear flicker across her eyes. She asked why, her voice soft, casual, but the tone a fraction too light. Mark did not avoid the request. He pulled his own phone from his pocket, unlocked it, and handed it to her first. "This is mine. Take your time." His transparency only made her hesitation more obvious. She scrolled through his phone quickly, barely looking, almost as if checking for something specific rather than exploring. Then she locked it and set it aside. "Nothing exciting," she muttered. Mark then reached for her phone. She handed it over reluctantly. He opened the messages, not knowing exactly what he expected to find, only that he would feel it when something was wrong. And there it was. Between two familiar names, a gap. A missing thread, a space where conversations should have been. He checked the call log. Another gap. No messages from the coworker she had mentioned so often. No record of the communication that their phone bill had shown clearly. The bill had listed almost 900 messages exchanged with a single number in just 1 month. Yet, on her phone, the box connected to that number was empty. Mark looked at her, his voice steady but carrying a depth of hurt she did not seem prepared to face. "Where are the messages with him?" Amber looked away first, picking at her sleeve, avoiding his eyes. "We don't really text. It's mostly work stuff." But the logs told a different story. Morning, evening, late night, days when she said she was out with friends. Messages every single day, except during the exact hours she had been away from home. Mark said nothing for a long moment, letting the silence fill the space between them. Because silence, in that moment, revealed more than words ever could. He did not shout. He did not accuse. His voice remained calm, almost heartbreakingly calm. The tone of a man who had loved deeply and now stood at the edge of knowing. Amber finally admitted that she deleted the messages, claiming she did not want to deal with the argument, claiming it was only about a divorce she had been contemplating. But even in her explanation, nothing felt whole, nothing felt true. Half-truths carry a weight of their own, heavier than lies because they force the listener to carry the burden of filling the empty spaces themselves. Mark felt that weight settle on him as he stood in the quiet of their kitchen. It was not the confession he wanted, not the honesty he had hoped for, but it was enough to confirm what his heart already knew. Sometimes the truth does not arrive with clarity. Sometimes it hides behind hesitation, deletes itself from a screen, slips between sentences, and leaves only an ache behind. And as Mark finally set her phone down, he understood a painful reality he had never faced before. Sometimes silence is the confession. What if the slowest kind of heartbreak is not the moment someone leaves you, but the months when they stay while their warmth quietly fades away? That was the question Mark found himself living every single day after the confrontation about the missing messages. Nothing exploded. Nothing healed. Instead, everything grew colder in a way that felt even more final than a slammed door. Amber spoke to him in short, clipped replies, answers that carried no emotion and no curiosity about his day. Her texts became transactional, stripped of the softness that once made their marriage feel like home. "Do you want me to pick up milk? Trash goes out tonight. Kids need snacks for school." She communicated the way a coworker might, polite enough to function, but lacking any trace of intimacy. There were no good mornings, no small jokes, no familiar tone. Her silence did not come in large blocks. It came in the spaces where affection used to exist. When someone withdraws emotionally, psychologists describe it as a slow leak, barely noticeable at first, but eventually the entire container empties. That was what Mark was witnessing in real time. Then came the moment that sliced through the haze of confusion with startling clarity. And it came not from Amber, but from someone far too young to understand the weight of his own words. They were sitting at the dinner table, eating mashed potatoes and talking about nothing meaningful. Mark was exhausted, Amber distant, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. And then their young son, innocent and curious in the way only children can be, looked up and asked a simple question. "Mom, Google says bars aren't open at 4 in the morning." Amber froze. Mark did too. The boy's voice had no accusation in it, just honest confusion, the kind that unintentionally exposes the lies of adults. Amber forced a smile, too big, too quick, and replied that she never said she got drinks at 4, only that she met with friends early. But the damage was done. A child had drawn a straight line where Amber had tried to bend the truth. It was the first time the reality of her actions radiated through the family, and Mark felt something inside him shift painfully. After that night, the emotional unraveling accelerated. Mark entered a stage that many people who experience betrayal describe as self-blame, a psychological attempt to regain control by believing the hurt is somehow their fault. If he could understand what he did wrong, he thought, maybe he could fix it. Maybe she would choose him again. Maybe 19 years still meant something. This belief, this desperate hope, is known as blind attachment, a survival instinct triggered when the foundation of one's life threatens to collapse. Mark began trying too hard, over-functioning in the relationship. He cleaned her car. He paid bills that were no longer his responsibility. He brought home her favorite coffee and left it in the fridge without saying a word. He sent gentle check-in messages even when she ignored them. He tried to shrink himself to be easier to love, to be less of a burden, hoping she might notice, hoping she might soften, hoping she might remember who they once were. And every time she responded with indifference, it chipped away at him, leaving him smaller, more fragile, more lost. Then came the sentence that ended any illusion he had left. One evening, after a rare family dinner, Amber rode in the front seat of the car, quiet but not hostile, and for a brief moment, Mark felt something he had not felt in months. Hope. Maybe they were turning a corner. Maybe there was still something left to salvage. But as they pulled into the driveway, Amber spoke without looking at him. "This doesn't mean I love you again." The words hit him with the cold precision of a blade. Not angry, not emotional, just final. That was the moment the 19-year marriage broke. Not because the sentence was cruel, but because it was true. Mark gripped the steering wheel, swallowed the lump in his throat, and nodded. There was nothing else to say. When someone tells you they do not love you, you either listen or you lose yourself trying not to. That night, Mark packed a small bag. No shouting, no dramatic exit, no slamming doors. Just a man quietly accepting that the home he had built no longer belonged to him. He walked past the bedroom they once shared, down the stairs where they carried their children as babies, out the door he had unlocked thousands of times, this time without knowing if he would ever return. He drove until the city lights blurred through his tears, and checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room was small, dim, and smelled faintly of detergent, but in the silence he felt something unexpected. Emptiness, yes. Grief, absolutely. But beneath the ache, beneath the shattering, there was also a thin thread of something else. Relief, not because he wanted the marriage to end, but because staying had been killing him slowly. As he lay on the stiff motel mattress staring at the ceiling, he realized that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk away from a place where their heart no longer has room to breathe. And in that dark, unfamiliar room, with nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and the pounding of his own heart, a truth settled over him with quiet certainty. Sometimes walking away is the only way to stop dying slowly. What if the real turning point in a broken life is not the day everything collapses, but the quiet morning you wake up and realize the pain didn't crush you the way it did yesterday? That realization arrived for Mark not in a dramatic moment, but in the small, peaceful details of a life he never intended to build. After leaving the family home, he rented a modest one-bedroom house not far from where his sons lived. The first night there was rough. The air felt too still, the silence too large. But something changed on the second night. He slept, not fitfully, not half awake, not with the weight of wondering where Amber was or what she was hiding. He slept through the night, uninterrupted, and for the first time in months his mind did not wake him with alarms. Waking in that quiet room, with soft morning light filtering through the blinds, he felt a strange and unexpected peace settle into his bones. Healing often begins this way, psychologists say, not with triumph but with rest, with the simple proof that your nervous system finally feels safe enough to stop looking for danger. In the weeks that followed, Mark discovered a rhythm in his new life, one built not on survival but on slow, steady recovery. He cooked simple meals, kept the house clean, took long walks, and rediscovered the forgotten joy of hearing his own thoughts without fear. It was during this period of rebuilding that Rachel entered his life. Not as a replacement for Amber and not as a rescue, but as a quiet reminder that he was still worthy of affection, conversation, and gentle laughter. They matched online by chance, exchanged a few polite messages, and soon met for a casual drink. Mark arrived nervous, carrying the invisible bruises of the past months, but Rachel greeted him with a smile that did not ask anything of him. She listened more than she spoke, offering the kind of presence that does not crowd or demand. In her company, he felt seen again, not as the man who had been left behind, but as a man learning to start over. Their time together was not dramatic. It was a slow unfolding, walks in the park, shared stories, quiet evenings, the simple comfort of being understood. Rachel never tried to fix him. She simply allowed him to breathe again. And in that space, Mark felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope, not for a new relationship, but for himself. He realized he was not broken in the way Amber's choices had made him feel. He was bruised, yes, but bruises heal. With every conversation, every moment of calm companionship, Mark found pieces of himself returning. While Mark was rebuilding, the balance of power in his old life began to shift. Amber, who had once seemed so certain in her choices, started to face the consequences of them. Her job became unstable, then disappeared altogether after internal conflicts at work. The house she fought so hard to keep began slipping through her fingers as bills piled up, and the relationship she had risked everything for lost its thrill once the secrecy vanished. Many therapists note that affairs often thrive only in the shadows. When exposed to normal life, they crumble under the weight of reality. That seemed to be happening now. Amber's confident indifference faded, replaced by polite messages, questions about the children, and subtle attempts to re-establish a connection she had severed too quickly. But Mark had changed. Healing had strengthened him, not hardened him. He did not seek revenge. He did not celebrate her struggles. He did not try to save her or step back into the role of caretaker he once held. Instead, he held boundaries, clear and calm, with silence that no longer came from pain but from peace. Silence became his shield, a gentle but firm reminder that not every wound grants re-entry, that not every story needs to be rewritten with the same characters. His therapist summed it up in a single sentence that would stay with him long after the sessions ended. "It's not your job to rescue the person who broke you." Those words freed him from the guilt that had lingered in his ribs for months. They allowed him to understand that compassion does not require self-sacrifice, that empathy does not require returning to the place where he had once been diminished. Mark's growth was not loud. It was steady, grounded, and deeply human. He learned to sit with his memories without drowning in them. He learned to see Amber's choices without blaming himself. He learned to appreciate Rachel's presence without rushing into promises he was not ready to make. And most importantly, he learned to look at his reflection and see a man who had not been destroyed, only reshaped. End quote. In the end, healing did not mean forgetting. It meant remembering without pain, remembering without shame, remembering without needing answers that no longer mattered. Healing, Mark realized, is simply the quiet reclaiming of one's own heart. What if the real ending to a heartbreak story is not the moment a relationship dies, but the moment a man finally remembers who he was before the pain began? Months after leaving his home, his marriage, and the version of himself that once bent in every direction trying to hold a broken life together, Mark discovered that healing is not loud. It does not come with grand announcements or sudden clarity. It arrives slowly and quietly, like a sunrise slipping over the horizon, warming the edges of a life he thought would stay cold forever. He started rebuilding from the ground up, not out of pride, and not to prove anything, but because there was no other direction left except forward. Work became his anchor. The travel rotation he picked up kept him busy, focused, and surrounded by people who saw him as capable and steady rather than as the man whose marriage had fallen apart. His productivity surged, not in a desperate attempt to distract himself, but because he finally had mental space again. When a person stops living in survival mode, their mind finds room to breathe, and Mark felt that shift deeply. With the extra hours and steady pay, his finances strengthened in a way they hadn't in years. He began saving again, planning again, imagining a future that wasn't shaped by someone else's instability. Eventually, he found a modest house within walking distance of Amber's, close enough for the boys to come and go easily but far enough that he could reclaim his peace. Moving in was simple. He brought only what he needed, refusing to fill the space with reminders of the past. He bought a second-hand couch, a small grill for the backyard, and an old wooden table that fit perfectly under the warm kitchen light. The first night he slept there, on a new mattress that still smelled of plastic, he lay awake for a moment listening to the quiet. Not the anxious quiet he had known, but the peaceful kind that comes with beginning again. When he opened his eyes the next morning, sunlight pouring through the window, he realized something profound. He had slept through the night without dreaming of loss. Healing had finally taken root. And then, almost unexpectedly, he allowed himself something he had once thought impossible. He bought a car he had dreamed of since he was young, a 1979 Fiat Spider, worn but honest, the kind of car that carries stories in every scratched panel. It was not a flashy indulgence. It was a declaration to himself that life was not over. There were still joys he was allowed to claim. The day he drove it home, wind pressed against his face, music humming low from the speakers, he felt younger not in age but in spirit. Repairing his life did not mean returning to who he had been. It meant becoming someone stronger, someone wiser, someone lighter. While Mark's world was slowly rebuilding itself, Amber's world began to fracture. Not because Mark wished it, and not because he celebrated it, but because choices have consequences. The job she had once taken pride in slipped away after internal conflict. The mortgage she insisted she could manage alone began to crumble under unpaid bills and rising pressure. The new relationship, built in secrecy, thrill, and adrenaline, lost its spark when exposed to real life. Many people, therapists say, mistake chaos for passion, and when the chaos ends, so does the illusion. Mark watched all this from a distance, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm understanding that people who choose chaos often fall with it. He no longer felt the need to fix her problems, no longer felt responsible for the emotional storms she created. His silence was not a punishment but a boundary, a quiet line drawn with dignity. He answered messages about the children, respected logistics, maintained civility, but he no longer stepped in to rescue her from consequences she had chosen. Sometimes letting someone fall is not cruelty. It is closure. Rachel remained a steady presence in his life, not demanding, not rushing, simply walking beside him, at a pace that felt natural. With her he found ease, conversation, companionship that did not require effort or performance. She saw him not as the man who had been abandoned, but as the man who had survived, grown, and returned to himself. They shared evenings on park benches, gentle laughter, small stories of childhood, and the quiet understanding that healing is not the act of forgetting but the ability to remember without pain. She helped him see that love could be calm, kind, and patient, a far cry from the storm he had escaped. One afternoon, during a session with his therapist, Mark voiced a lingering guilt he could not quite name, a guilt tied to walking away, to watching Amber struggle, to choosing himself after 19 years of choosing her. His therapist listened patiently and then said the sentence that finally freed him. "It's not your job to rescue the person who broke you." Those words settled into him like truth he had been waiting for, a truth that stitched together the last torn pieces of his heart. After that moment, Mark no longer questioned his path. He no longer wondered if he should go back or if he had abandoned something worth saving. He understood fully that starting over is not a failure, it is a form of wisdom. Months later, he boarded a flight to Thailand, his first real trip alone in years. He spent the long flight watching the clouds drift below him, feeling the weight of the past finally lighten. When he arrived in Chiang Mai and stood by the river on his second night, the warm air brushing against his face, he looked up at the sky and felt something he had not felt since he was a young man. Freedom. Not the loud kind, not the rebellious kind, but a gentle freedom, the kind that comes when you release the last pieces of a life that no longer fits. The sky stretched wide above him, and for the first time in a long time his future felt wide too. Healing had not erased what happened. It had simply made space around it, enough space for him to breathe, to forgive himself, to feel hope again. And that hope, small but steady, lit his life from the inside out. In the end, Mark's story is not about betrayal. It is about rebirth. It is about a man who learned that truth does not always come from confessions, that some people break you quietly, and that healing is always a journey inward. It is about remembering that even when life fractures you, you still get to choose how to rebuild. You get to choose who you become after the fall. You get to choose which pieces you carry forward and which ones you finally let go. And for anyone listening to his story, especially those who have lived long enough to know the weight of heartbreak and the strength it takes to start again, his message is simple. If life broke you, you still get to choose how to rebuild. If this story touched something in you, you are welcome to share your own. Somewhere out there, someone may need to hear it.